Before we get into this demonstration, I want to show the practicality of training at close range on scaled targets. Our 1/6 scale target's A zone is around an inch, and normally we are shooting it at 3.5 feet or just over a meter, which equates to the standard distance for most benchmarks at 7 yards on a full-size target. Keep in mind, it will be more accurate on the full-size target at range because these bullet holes will scale with the target. The relationship between the target size and distance, however, is proportional in terms of our perspective, but the shooting reality tends to be slightly more difficult at the real distance because our eyes focus differently at range. We can, however, still say that if we have the ability to hit a 1-inch target at 10 meters, then we should be able to hit a 10-inch target at 100 meters. The distance does seem to play mind games on us, but it is the same level of precision. Just keep these things in mind when training and find confidence in the fact that training on the small targets will be more than sufficient, but your skills should be verified at the real distance from time to time. This proportionality, however, does drop off at a certain range, which in this example was 232 meters, where the accuracy went down to 40% and likely would have been even lower if I would have continued firing. Alright, for you guys to have a point of reference, we're going to run through an entire dry fire session, which you can find later in this course. This is more of a full body workout, which is going to be working a variety of skills. It's essential in dry fire that we're honest with ourselves, meaning that if our sight picture is not perfect on that preferred target area and we press the trigger, it's a miss. It's a miss in dry fire, just like it'd be a miss in live fire. If we're not honest with that, we're not going to have any progress because we're not holding ourselves to a standard. And with that logic, we need to make sure that we're treating our dry fire like our live fire, meaning we're gripping the pistol in the same way with the same pressures as we would if there's live ammunition causing recoil on the firearm. We also want to have the mindset that that gun is going bang every time we pull that trigger, meaning we're not getting in that lazy mindset that it's just going to be a click. We want to actually think of those as live fire trigger presses every time we're pressing that trigger. I find sometimes when I get complacent and that mindset starts to fade away, as nerdy and lame as it is, I try to make gun sounds when I'm pressing the trigger to remind myself that this is going to go bang in reality. As we talked about in our dry fire tools lesson, I've set up my dry fire area with a variety of different targets, some that I won't be using in this workout, but they're there for me if I want to use them. We've got our 1/6 scale IPSC targets, some poppers, some tuxedo targets, our metrics test, the patch drill, and the A zone for USPSA and IPSC. On the back wall as well, behind the camera, I have the exact same setup, which is at a further distance. It's about 8 feet versus about 3.5. If you have enough room and safe directions in your dry fire area, setting up targets on opposite walls or adjacent walls gives you a lot of different things you can do with transitions and distances to the targets. Like we talked about earlier, it's very helpful for us to have a dry fire area set up so we can conveniently train on it when we have that time set aside. It's also not a bad idea to make sure that once a month or so, our targets are varied in terms of the distance between them and their assortment. Before we get started, we want to make sure there's no live ammunition around us in our dry fire area and that no one's going to be coming in while we're practicing. Next, prove our firearms safe, and then our magazines. Gonna load a snap cap. It is beneficial when we're running dry fire to have a snap cap in the chamber. It does give your trigger break a little bit different feel because the firing pin is actually hitting something instead of kind of rebounding in thin air. Moving on, snap cap, snap cap, snap cap, and snap cap. All right, let's get started. First, we're gonna run 5 cold draws from the holster with a trigger press into an A zone target. It's one of these 1/6 scale ones behind you here. Okay, this is just to see where we are cold and to see how rough our grip is and sight picture is downrange when we haven't really warmed up yet. Just gonna rip the timer off here. So 1.14. Okay, that was a little up and to the right. That's a 0.87. Almost dead on, 0.91. .87. My grip was kind of funky there, but I got my sight picture. So if your sight picture is pretty far off on that, it's kind of a no-go on the run. If I'm not getting an A-zone hit down range, it doesn't matter. My time is negated. And 0.90. So I just mark an X on that 0.87 where my sight picture was way off. Okay, moving on. So the next we're going to do now is we're going to slow down the draw and just start working it back up to that speed. So all I'm doing right now is to kind of fix my grip. I'm going to start down with my hands relaxed. We're going to do 5 first and final grips. So I'm having an issue with this. So you can see I'm coming up too high on the tane. My skin's kind of flapping over there. So I need to do a little bit more of this and ensure that I'm getting that first and final grip perfect on my firearm. Okay, moving on, we're going to do 5 from the first and final grip into the sight picture with no trigger press. All right, those felt good. So now we're going to bring it back up to speed, and we're going to do 10 draws once we've warmed up our first and final grip and our sight picture from there. All right. Woo. It's a 0.85. And I completely fumbled my grip. 0.88. Woo. 0.98. .90. Oh, it was a little bit too far down to the right. 0.89. Dead on at 1.03. .89. .87. .88. And that's it for my 10 there. Okay, we're going to move on to the bill drill. So that's just draw into the A zone in 6 rounds. All right, so I'm a little bit further than I should be with this on the 6 scale. We're just going to run it and try to get underneath that par time. It's important that we keep the rhythm on the trigger and we're keeping that sight picture inside the A zone. So for this, I'm going to run it on a par time on my phone. I'm going to try to do 2 seconds and under, meaning that if my last round on that sight picture isn't happening before the second beep, then I've failed that drill. So to track this, all I'm going to write down is basically pass or fail and any other weird abnormalities that are happening during the reps. All right, we got our technical difficulty sorted out here. We're going to start with the 2 second par time, do 5 bill drills. That one kind of surprised me. So my first trigger brake was actually out to the right of the A zone. So I'm going to mark that down as a fail on the 4th rep there. Remember, when we're running this too, if we're not running a resetting trigger, we want to make sure that we're trying to simulate that trigger brake with the subsequent trigger presses, meaning that we're pushing it with the same pressure required on the actual trigger brake, and we're maintaining that sight picture in there with those trigger presses. Obviously, we don't have recoil to play with, but if your sight picture is moving around outside of the A zone with those trigger presses, you're missing those shots, meaning we either need to tighten up on the gun so our trigger press isn't moving it around so much, or we need to fix our trigger press, likely both. Okay, last bill drill. All right, you can also run this with the old trusty Coolfire recoil, which actually will give you, if I'm running on the time, each split. So this obviously is a nice training tool, or if you have a resetting trigger, you can get every single one of those trigger presses for your bill drills and your splits, even on your timer here. So this won't be from the holster, but... And that's a 1.94, so my splits are in the 1.6 category there. Run it one more time. And that's a 1.94 again. 106 is first round, 2-1, 1-5, 1-7, 1-7, 1-8. All right, moving on, we're going to run the El Presidente drill. So that is 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, reload, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 into the A, hopefully. Okay, same thing with this. We're going to have to run a par timer, just because if we don't have a resetting trigger, there's no way for us to really get that time other than doing it live. All right, and we're going to run a 4.5 second par timer on this. Okay, it's really important during Dryfire to be honest with ourselves, or we're not going to be able to actually progress through this. If I'm running a 4.5 second par timer, but I'm cheating my hits through the target, it's not doing me any good at all. So I need to be consciously aware of where my sight pictures are on these targets as I'm moving through, and that I'm actually hitting that par time. If I'm not hitting it consistently, I need to slow down. If I'm hitting it more than consistently, like I'm hitting it 90% of the time, I should probably push myself a bit more and drop it down. All right, so that one was a fail. My first round was up here, corrected down to the A zone. My last couple were fine, but my first round was off target. All right, missed the par time on that one. And I'll run the last one facing the other way. It's a little bit further away how it actually should be. Woo, close. All right, moving on, we're going to do our primary malfunction drills. We're not doing a lot of these, only 4 of them, and we're going to do a 1.5 second par time for this. Remember, we're trying to make sure that our training is set up to the reality of how often we're going to be doing these things. which isn't very much. So this isn't a huge part of our training, but we want to make sure that we're maintaining that skill. All right. Cool. All right, we're just going to do 4 of these. So obviously snap caps helps with this. Otherwise your slide's going to be locking back every time. All right, and then we're going to move into the secondary malfunctions. So you don't have to set this up with the snap caps every time. You can if you want to make it a little bit more realistic, but really we need to go through the motions of the unload and then the load. All right, so the par time on these is going to be 3.5. Now these are my par times. These are what I've established through practice and through Dryfire and through live fire. Obviously, if you're missing these par times or you're beating these par times, you need to adjust those according to where you're at. Oh, that didn't work. And one more. So you can see we're just going through the motions of this, just trying to get that immediate reaction if I have an issue with my gun to do the tap and rack. And if that's a problem, go right into the secondary malfunction, if I'm IDing it as that. All right, last one here. Talking about primary malfunctions, go right into a primary malfunction. We're going to run a secondary malfunction. So you can see there when I did the primary malfunction, it showed that my gun was empty, so we just went into a reload. So that can happen often when you run a primary malfunction. It could be that your slide didn't lock back in the last round, and now your gun's going to tell you you're empty when you do that primary malfunction drill, which can lead you into a reload. All right, secondary malfunction. We're going to do this. All right, so I can be speeding up that par timer. I had about a second left every time I was running that. So my par timer for that should probably be around a 2.5 or a 3. All right, moving on, we're going to run a 3 reload 3. And for that, I'm just going to run into the metrics target here, into the A. I'm going to go 3 into the A, reload, 3 into the A. And the par timer is now set to 4 seconds for this. All right, missed the par timer on that one. purpose of this drill is getting and establishing that grip after the reload to ensure we're able to deliver 3 quick rounds in succession. Oftentimes, if you're running just a 1 reload 1, you don't have to have a perfect grip because you're only running 1 round. So as we boost those round numbers on the second string of fire, it ensures that we have a good grip on the firearm and we're not cheating the reload. All right, so I'm just going to mark down. I'm having some issues indexing the mag there. And we're going to move on to the turning reload. So with this, we're going to point at one wall, and when the timer goes off, we're going to reload while doing a 180 and facing the next wall. And then we're going to face the next wall for the left turn. We're going to do 3 of each of those. We're going to do a part timer of 2.5. Actually, let's push it. Let's do it 2. 2 seconds. Okay, dropping that down to 1.5 now to push the envelope on it. So we're going to do a right turn into the wall and then back away. Okay, those are all passes at 1.5. All right, last what we're going to try to run is, sorry, not last, we're going to run a 1-2-1. All right, so that's going to be into the popper, 2 into the A zone here. Obviously we have a no shoot that's covering half the A zone, so we got to kind of slow down. 1, 1, 2, 1. I'm going to run that in the targets behind here. So again, our part time for that was a 2.5. Yeah, let's see how that goes. Okay, just beating the part time there. Perfect. All right. Now we're going to end on 10 trigger presses. There's no time on these. We're going to run it on the patch drill. So I'm just going to go down 2 columns, and I'm not doing any time pressure. I want to end on an accuracy drill to ensure that I'm getting perfect trigger presses where my sights aren't moving. I'm keeping that sight picture all the way through the trigger break. All right, you do the last 5 on the target behind you. Those are a little bit too big at this range. We want to make sure when we're doing this drill at the end that we're ensuring that the target is small enough that it's causing pressure on that trigger, where we need to actually get that trigger press perfect, otherwise our sights are going to move out of that zone. All right, and that's it. So that was about 15 minutes. Obviously I'm slowing things down. I'm kind of having issues with track and everything. But that's what you can expect in a normal dry fire session, is between 5 and 10 minutes if you can run right through it. We do want to make sure that we're keeping track of our times during these dry fire sessions. As annoying as it is, it's very helpful for that progressive overload. Just like when you're going to the gym and you're keeping track of your benchmarks, if you keep hitting that benchmark, it's not going to assist you just maintaining that weight. You got to boost it up if you want to get bigger and stronger. Same thing with this. We want to make sure our par times are continually going down, or our preferred target area is getting smaller. Those are the two ways that we can kind of keep track of those metrics, is that we're getting more accurate and we're getting quicker. On the other hand, don't put all your stock in your par times. You can see as I ran through this, my par times were pretty far off on a lot of the drills. This isn't my typical dry fire area. The distance to the targets are different. Now that's affecting my par times because those are my normal metrics that I'm using in my dry fire area that has the proper distances set up. And don't think that's a wasted dry fire session if our metrics are off or we have outliers in our par times. Remember, real life and competition aren't the same targets and same distances every single time. So it is good for us to vary our sight pictures and distances and transitions. For instance, in the homework, you might notice that we transition often from a bigger target to a smaller target, or vice versa. Like so here, we have a full-size IPSC target down to a tiny patch, and vice versa. But you notice this is on a diagonal. So this transition is going to be different than if I had it up here or above or on the other side, right to left to right. All of these things are going to add variables to our pars and to our ability to track our scores, which is why in shooting we have a lot of benchmark drills that have a designated distance and target so that we can all be on the same page when we're tracking our scores in comparison to others, in comparison to ourselves. Something like the metrics test is a good way to track our cumulative progress in our full skill set. But we can see if we have a big number in our reloads, that's a skill that we need to isolate and improve. You're also going to have pretty different metrics and par times between a duty rig and a competition rig, and even inside competition, open division, or production division. Generally, when I'm tracking a normal dry fire session that don't have those typical benchmark drills in them, I'm just looking for glaring issues that stand out in the times. If you see issues in your dry fire session, like here when I was having issues in the 3R3 indexing that magazine, I'm just going to take that and isolate it into my makeup day later in the week to ensure that that skill is progressing as fast as the others. This is why when you get into the sharpening the blade section of the homework, we're maintaining our skills in a very varied way. Kind of like push-pull leg days, we're working on various different parts of our skill set for shooting, and we're ensuring that we're hitting everything once in a while. Remember, with a lot of dry fire drills, we're isolating skills which may seem weird in a real life or competition context, but just like a bicep curl isolates a specific muscle, which in turn makes the body stronger as a whole, some techniques may not apply in all contexts, but they're important to learn to make sure that we have a full skill set. That's all I got for you today. Remember, we got to put the work in, we got to think first and prepare.